Hello, my name is Lindsay Weirich, and today we're going to paint this cute still life using Derwent Chromaflow colored pencils. Chromaflow pencils are an opaque wax-based pencil that are beautiful for working on toned paper. I've got my drawing transferred onto my craft cardstock, and you can see the reference photo on the screen. Now I'm going to begin by using the white Derwent Chromaflow pencil to draw the lace in. Now I want to let you know that you can sketch this all in with your pencils on your cardstock, but I wanted to make sure you'd be able to see it on screen, so I've got a really dark outline there. But if you want to even draw it on scrap paper and transfer it, you could even use white transfer paper if you wanted to have the lines a little bit lighter. But these pencils are opaque, so they will cover them up. So what I'm doing here is just trying to draw in the basic pattern in the lace with the white pencil. I want to cover up those dark lines, but of course, if you're drawing it freehand, you won't have to worry about that. But you do want to press fairly firmly when you do this. The reason for that is you want this white pencil to make almost a resist, because after we've got the lace drawn, we're going to be going over it with our shadow colors. Using the natural brown pencil, I'm going to start adding shadows to my still life. Now on areas where the lace is touching the table, I'm not going to have a very wide shadow, but on this area here where the lace is lifted up, the shadow will be a lot deeper because it's going to be away from the surface and casting more of a shadow. Where objects touch the surface that it's casting the shadow on, the shadow will be the darkest, and as it goes away from the surface, it'll get lighter. Like these taller images or taller objects, such as the spool, that's going to cast a longer shadow, but it's going to get lighter as it gets away from the area where the two surfaces meet. I hope that makes sense. So as we work our way through, we're going to add shadows to each of the objects, or the cast shadows rather, as shown in the reference photo you can see on screen. Now we're going to add the shadow behind the lace, so we're just going to color over the lace using a very light touch. That thick application of firmly applied white is going to resist the brown, and the brown is just going to stick in between the bits of lace. Isn't that a cool technique? And you're just going to go in and keep building up that dark color until you feel like the shadow is good enough. Since we can see through the lace, we need to make sure that we color objects that are behind the lace the same way we did the shadow. So this pink ribbon that is looped underneath the lace, we got to make sure we can peek through and see those colors. So I'm going to be adding some pinks and some magentas and just really bringing that color underneath the lace to give us that depth and dimension. When you're working with a limited supply, you're really going to have to mix your colors to create the exact color you want, such as this kind of corally pink ribbon. I'm using a combination of blush pink, that's probably the majority, the main color I'm using. I'm using salmon for my mid highlights, magenta for my shadows, and then raisin for my really dark shadows. And then I'll go in and add white for any of the shiny parts. So instead of having one pencil that's going to give me the exact same coral color I want, like I might use if I had a larger set, I'm actually going to use those 5 colors to be able to bring out the tone and the luster and the shadows that I need. But I'll tell you what, you're going to have a much nicer look using a variety of colors to bring out all of those tones than you would if you just colored it one flat color. So even if you have a larger set of pencils, make sure you do get some really bright highlights and some dark shadows so you bring out a nice three-dimensional look in the object that you're coloring, like this beautiful shiny ribbon. Moving on to the buttons, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going in with that raisin, which is that dark kind of reddish brown, adding in my shadows and the buttonholes, adding in pink, salmon, adding in orange, basically just layering up my colors until I get the tone that I want. When you're using a limited color palette and you're trying to match a color, what I do is I go in with the closest color first. So looking at that peach button, I'm looking at the closest color, which would probably be yellow. And then I'd be layering up pinks and whites and trying to shift that color a little bit closer to what I'm after. So keep that in mind when you're using a limited color palette like this set of 24 pencils. Also, remember, you are the artist. You can boost the colors a little bit more. You can shift them. You can make them coordinate better with the other objects in your still life. So don't feel like you have to color everything exactly the way you see it in your subject. You can definitely go your own way and color it the way you see fit. Moving on to the pearls, you can see I've already done the one that's sitting on the lace, but I wanted to show you these two in the foreground here because they've got more colors to bounce off. So the pearls are a reflective, a slightly reflective surface. So they're going to bounce the color from the ribbons and from the buttons and from that spool that I haven't colored in yet, but you can see from the reference photo is going to be that kind of peachy corally color. I'm putting in the colors that are reflected. I've got some light pinks, I've got some orange, I've got a little bit of a blue tone, which is actually kind of from the pearl itself. And now I'm going in with that white pencil and I'm coloring in the highlights really strongly. The reason I want to do that is because I want to do the same thing that we did with the lace, which is to create almost a resist. If I put in that really bright highlight now, it's going to, if I color over it with like a darker color, it's going to resist that darker color and let me keep that white highlight. You can use that same technique if you were drawing a cat to put in the whiskers, and then you could color the fur over it and that whisker would kind of resist the color that you're putting down over it as long as you're not pressing as hard. It's just kind of a nice technique. And I'm just layering up my colors here. Now I'm going in with some black because I want to get that, I want to get the hole in the pearl really defined. And another tip I want to share is that if you have like a circle template, you can use that circle template to help you get a nice round pearl there. Anytime you've got a round object, you can actually lay that over and color with a template on there, and it would help you keep your nice edges. So I just wanted to put that out there in case you wanted to try it. Moving over to the ball of tatting thread, we're going to begin with a label on top and start with a really pale wash of gold. And now I'm going over with white. And those are going to mix together to make kind of a cream color, which is what I'm going for here. I want a slightly lighter value than the paper itself. And I just want it to look kind of like old and antique because it is kind of an old ball of tatting thread. And you don't want to color too firmly because you need to make sure there's enough tooth of the paper left to take the red and the navy blue, it's called denim, those colors on top. So we're going to start off with the red, and I am drawing the circle in the center, and then I'll be putting this kind of star shape inside because this was star tatting. Now speaking of the word star, that word is printed large enough in the label that we'll be able to see that, and so is the word tatting, but everything else is just going to be pretty much marks. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your still life, especially if you have it sat up in front of you on your table. Ask yourself if you can read those words clearly. If you can't, it would make more sense to just put little marks down for the letters. So here I'm spelling out star. Now I'm working with a sharp pencil, but what I do is I rotate that pencil as I'm going so it keeps the tip sharp, so I don't have to stop and resharpen frequently as I'm working, because that would be kind of annoying. Just turn your pencil as you go and you'll keep a nice sharp point as you go. Now, after we're done our label, we're going to start working on the thread. And I did the label first because it was in behind. The thread kind of overlaps. And we're doing that same technique that we did with the lace, where we're drawing in some sharp lines to begin with, and then we'll be working other colors over the top of them. I'm starting off with Raisin as my shadow color, getting in those really dark marks, those crisscrossy threads in the side shadows. And now I'm going in with Magenta. Now, as I color in, I want to make sure that my strokes, my pencil strokes, are going in the same direction as the thread is wound around the cylinder there, because that's going to make my effect look a lot more realistic by the time I'm done. I'm layering up some blush pink and some orange. I'm also going to put a little yellow in there too. I want to combine the colors I need to get to that kind of corally creamsicle color. Now orange is the closest color I have to coral, so I'm going to use that to carefully trace over my loose thread line. Now of course, if you're doing this freehand, you don't have to be as careful because wherever that thread lands is where it's going to be. We haven't put a shadow under it yet, so you can be pretty free with that. I love sketching freehand, so just be encouraged to try that. You don't need to be super duper planned out and fussy with colored pencil unless you want to be. So totally up to you. Now white really makes these colors merge together and pop and get that luster that thread has. So that's always kind of a nice treat at the end to add your yellow. Now you want to go through and finish up coloring anything else you have left in your design, like this little orange button here. And you can also add any adjustments that you need to any other of the elements that you have in your picture. We still need to do some shading here, so so keep that in mind. We haven't done all of that yet. So now we're going to go in and add a shadow underneath our thread, and we're just going to use a very light touch and that same natural brown color we used to shade everything else. And part of that is because we're working on a brown paper, so it's natural that we have a brown shadow there. If you're working on white, you may want to use gray. Just kind of keep that in mind that your surface is going to dictate that a little bit. Now, one thing we haven't done yet is use black for any of the shadows, and we're going to do that now. And I recommend you have a nice sharp point on your pencil so that you can really get into the tooth of the paper. This is a fairly smooth paper. It's a cardstock you could pick up at any craft store. So, you know, it's not a really rough paper. You're not going to get tons of grain, but you still want that pencil to be nice and sharp so that you will get a fairly smooth application and you won't have to press too hard. You don't want to press really hard with this black pencil or you're going to end up with a really harsh, unnatural looking line. We're overlapping the brown that we already put there, and we're only putting this in where the shadows are the darkest. And if you remember at the beginning of the video, when I talked about the places where an object touches the surface being the darkest shadow area, that's where we're putting our black now. So it's kind of easy to remember. If you remember where the objects touch is where it's going to be darkest. And now for the final step of this project, and that is to add the white highlights. Now, white colored pencils tend to be the softest, so you don't want to sharpen it to a needle fine point if you're going to be adding a thick layer of highlight like we are doing here. And I want those nice reflective satiny highlights. So you don't want it super sharp. When I have to do the edge of something, I'll just kind of turn my pencil and try to find the sharpest edge I have, like I did on the edge of that ribbon, and that generally will give me a sharp enough tip. Now, if I need a really fine tip like on the thread here, I will sharpen it a little bit so I can trace this thread and get those little glints of highlight on it, but I'm not going to use a lot of pressure. So the sharper the pencil, the less pressure you want to use or you're going to snap them. The Derwent Chromaflows are very soft. They lay down color very easily, but if you go too sharp with them, especially the white, they will snap on you. Just keep that in mind because I don't want you to have to needlessly keep sharpening. Now, pretty much, I'm just going through and adding little smidgens of highlight or extra white where I need it. Maybe I am seeing some dark areas in the lace that I want to cover up, such as the pattern. But this is pretty much like a seasoning to taste in cooking. You just want to add those highlights wherever you see fit. And that pretty much wraps it up. I really enjoyed drawing this. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you like the outcome, and I hope you give it a try with your limited supplies. I want to show you an example of doing this freehand without the dark lines underneath. You get a softer look, so please feel free to approach this however you like. I want to thank you so much for watching. You can find a full materials list in the video description. Please give me a thumbs up before you go. Until next time, happy crafting.